BBC Radio Sheffield.
Good morning, it's Toby at breakfast. It's BBC Radio Sheffield. In a bit we're going to speak about tramlines and the fantastic weekend that we've got coming up there. But first, a Sheffield City Council meeting this week is going to look at a new report which shows that 62% of the remaining trees in Sheffield don't need chopping down. And it has raised questions from the city's tree campaigners who say that this new report and the fact that there are now other ways of looking at trees suggests that thousands of trees could have been saved if they'd been listened to. Paul Brook is the co-chair of Sheffield Tree Action Group, and he came in and spoke to us last week.
The council still say that no inquiry is necessary. They still say that we don't have to sit down, get to the truth of this and learn lessons from it. And they say that that somehow would be a distraction. Well, I'm sorry, unless this council is prepared to learn, they will keep making the same mistakes. And a prime example is the council have just agreed to save a tree, 191 trees that they've agreed to save. One of those trees blew down in September 2018. If they won't work with us and actually listen to us, they will continue to do this. Their cabinet report says 191 trees out of 218 investigated, 88% don't need anything extra doing to them. And one of those trees isn't there. Oh, in fact, two of the trees aren't there, and two of the trees needed absolutely no work whatsoever. It's time they started to listen.
Well, Councillor Lewis Dagnall is the Cabinet Member for Environment, Street Scene and Climate Change. And he joins us in the studio now. Thanks for coming in, Lewis.
Good morning, Toby.
Do you understand the concerns of the tree campaigners now? They're saying that when they were previously told that felling was always a last resort, it obviously wasn't.
Well, a little over a year ago, I came into the studio, newly appointed into the Cabinet, and I said that we needed to find a compromise on those trees where work was outstanding, and that would let us move on to the really important discussion about the long-term future of our street trees as part of the forest in Sheffield. And this Cabinet report starts to deliver on this. We see a tranche of trees which, after joint inspections, can be retained. And we are also commissioning a new street tree strategy with an independent chair, Liz Ballard of Sheffield and Rotherham Wildlife Trust.
So, when we were told in the past that things were going to be chopped down as a last resort, that wasn't factually correct, was it? There were other resorts, you just didn't want to investigate them.
Well, I think your political reporter, Liz Roberts, explained this very well on the radio last week, when she explained that there was a programme agreed between the council, Amy, and supported by the Department for Transport, and if the council had wanted to change the policy, we would have taken on greater financial liability and had to put in money up front. What's changed is, as part of the compromise, we've got Amy to compromise. Amy are taking on the risk from this tree work. Amy are putting the money in up front.
Absolutely. But that does just mean that if we go back, then it wasn't the last resort to chop them down. You could have just done this. You could have negotiated this with Amy, as you've done anyway, but thousands of trees may not have been chopped down. Mick Crofts, who's the Director of Business Strategy, he actually says in this press release that we've got here, having spoken about the trees that will be saved, the above statistics demonstrate that the new approach adopted and the additional funding being made available by Amy is having a significant positive impact. That means chopping them down wasn't the last resort. There was this that you could have done, and you didn't.
Well, I think it's I know it's tempting, but it's too simplistic to look back at the previous tree work and simply project this backwards. A lot of the early trees that
I think that's just maths, Lewis. I mean, if the percentage of the ones that you've looked at,
would you like to give me a moment to explain? The trees where they started work were those trees that were dead and had been left in situ because of a lack of highways work. They were dying, they were diseased, and that's where the council and campaigners and other stakeholders see eye to eye. So a lot of the work that had been done on those trees which were not controversial. The trees that were left were the trees where previously it was judged that the trees couldn't be retained as part of the highway, but by doing this joint work, by finding these solutions, those trees are being retained. So there are different types of trees.
So felling wasn't the last resort. You've got to admit that.
Well, we found a way forward by finding a compromise.
So felling wasn't the last resort, and
we found a way forward. That's a compromise. I'm glad we found it now.
But the fact that felling wasn't a last resort, and yet everybody said it was, is annoying to the protesters. But also, people from the council told Mr. Justice Males in court that felling was a last resort. Now, the tree campaigners of S11, that's one thing. Mr. Justice Mayles isn't going to like the fact that he wasn't told the truth, is he?
Well, I think that's a huge allegation to make, and it's not borne out. Look, when I came in last year...
Sorry, why is it not borne out?
I don't think it's borne out at all. I think if you want to get a highways engineer to explain the semantic differences and a work on the ground, you can. But what we're here to discuss today
there are very few
is this
semantic
report.
Differences. The last resort means you've looked at everything else.
It means the last
practicable
resort.
You can't have words in now.
No, it's quite clear. So the report we brought forward is a result of hard work. 18 months since the pause started. 18 months of hard work to find a compromise that allows us to move forward. And I'm really pleased that we brought forward this report.
I'm sure.
And it's credit to the campaigners who have put aside their differences with us to sit down and to hammer out an agreement and a way forward.
It's a simple thing that all you got to do is say we were wrong about it being the last resort. Because
it's
we were
always
told,
the last resort
It's a bit drastic, isn't it?
take a tree down.
last resort, said Brian Lodge.
Tree removal is a last resort where there's no practicable alternative.
That's what you said. Turns out there are practicable alternatives. Are you going to apologise?
Well, I've explained how there are practicable alternatives now that Amy are willing to pay for them.
But that's not what you said. You said there are no practical alternatives. So are you now going to apologise to the people who've had prison sentences passed down on them? Are you going to apologise?
I'm glad that we found a way forward. So, look, when I came in a year ago, a clip you could.
With Mr. Question, are you going to apologise?
So, when I came in a year ago to the studio,
that's a really easy question to answer. Are you going to apologise?
If you'll let me finish.
Well, it's only a yes or no, isn't it?
If you let me finish, I came in a year ago, and you said to me, the only compromise people want to see is to retain more trees, and that you thought that was impossible. And we've got a cabinet report going that's shown through hard work we have managed to find ways to change the programme, to retain more trees, and we're now focused on long-term vision for the trees. What I would say is that I am personally sorry about how the situation we got into, the impasse that was reached. I'm sorry to those who either, the workers on this programme, the campaigners, the residents, most of all, who just want good quality highways without this controversy. I am personally regretful that we reached the position that we did. But that underlines how happy I am that we've now found a way forward.
I think finding the way forward is great because it just shows that, people can work together. The worry is, and this is as we, and it is maybe looking a bit retrospective, but we did have Paul Scrivener on last week talking about the way that the Sheffield City Council is run, the governance. We did have cabinet members talking about a council enthralled to its officers. Paul tells us that when he took over, there was a bullying culture, he described it as, from the officers to the councillors, which took him some months to change. He now thinks that has gone back and that things aren't being run by the councillors.
Well, I mean,
people are going to point at the council and say that you know.
What's funny about that, though, is, again, if you look at this, I was sat in the studio a year ago and I said, let's do two things. Let's sit down and talk and find a way forward on the outstanding trees. And then let's try and put the energy that's been generated and the enthusiasm for trees as a positive into coming up with a new strategy. And I'm sat here now a year later and we've got a report going to Cabinet that delivers on both of those things. So if that's a clear example of councillors saying this is the direction and then it being delivered.
But we'd had so many councillors before, Terry Fawkes, Jack Scott, Julie Daw, Brian Lodge, so many council officers before saying this is the only thing that can happen. And yeah, we will push for you to go to prison. And yes, we will spend tens of thousands of pounds on barristers to try and get you behind bars. And people don't trust the council now. And you can understand that. You wouldn't, would you?
Well, I think that's
hundreds of thousands of pounds we could have saved if you'd just done this earlier as a council.
Well, we have done it. We've done it now.
Appreciate
We reached a position, we reached an impasse with it, where a pause was agreed. And when I came into post, we as a group, and with my other Labour and cooperative councillors, we've charted a new way forward, and we've seen that put into practice.
I appreciate that, but that does mean you must accept, I'm sure you accept, that means that every time a council officer or a councillor told us, or Stag, or the Star, or Yorkshire Post, this is a last resort, they knew they weren't telling the full truth. There were other resorts, you just didn't want to investigate them.
Well, I just think that's incorrect, and it rests on a misunderstanding of, you set up a programme of work. A programme of work was established for how do we renew the highway across Sheffield, with investment over 5 years and then maintaining it over 30 years. The government insisted it was with a contractor. It was arranged as a PFI. You start doing that work. We found, nobody predicted this happening, this issue over the trees, and for the first few years, especially when they were focusing on the dead and diseased trees.
Campaigners said this could happen all along. Campaigners will tell you this is what they wanted.
Did people sit here in 2009 when both the Liberal Democrats and the Labour Party were drawing up this programme of work? What people were concerned about was the state of the highway. The concerns about the trees emerged later, and we've changed the course of the programme to respond to
thousands have been chopped down.
But as I explain, it's too simplistic to project it onto trees that are of a different group.
Maybe that's the problem. The voters, the people who present radio programmes, maybe we're just all a bit thick.
Well, I don't think that at all. When I've gone out, I think people have shown an enormous amount of understanding about the challenges faced by councils, about the decisions that are open to us. I think people across the city are concerned about council policy. They're concerned about the effects of austerity on this council, and they want to make practical decisions that make life better in Sheffield.
Time was well beaten us. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. Much appreciate that. Councillor Lewis Dagnall, who always comes in when we ask him to talk about this. Thank you very much indeed. It's time for some traffic and travel.
Toby Foster at breakfast
on BBC Radio Sheffield.